I think when you come from a marginalised background, it can be quite difficult to feel like you have a place, well, obviously, because often space isn't made for you. So when someone not only tells you that you should have space, but actively provides space for you, it is really life-changing.
The Centre for Stories is something that my husband and I started together. We felt that there was a space that was lacking in the city, a space where it was convenient for people to come to. I looked around at various cultural and arts organizations, and I felt that just by being who they were excluding people, and we wanted to offer a space that was inclusive and safe. I'm less inclined to talk about cultural diversity because we then start putting people in boxes, but unfortunately that's the language that has to be used. So when I talk about us being inclusive, I mean inclusive in terms of both mainstream cultures and underrepresented communities. Because for me, the importance is for these groups to be talking to each other. The last thing we wanted to do was to create silos.
I think that the events that the centre is running, like sidewalks, are really important because, it's all about representation really. And that's one of the things that I think the centre does the best, is that it provides representation for people who don't often get to see themselves.
Sidewalks was a one-day kind of storytelling festival. We engaged 5 local venues, and then we were also a venue. Bookshops, cafes, bars. We drew inspiration from different events around the world which utilise non-traditional, non-arts and cultural spaces, and we applied to the City of Perth for funding. Being the City of Perth, they do want to activate spaces. We have a really good community of emerging and established writers, so both the people who were mentored and the mentors themselves. And Sidewalks, being such a broad program, was a really good opportunity to work with those people. For example, Lisa Longman from the Young Boxing Women's Project, she spoke on a panel with Manny Gomes and Shanali Pereira, so they're all part of the boxing project. It was a really good opportunity to give them a platform to speak more about what they do, because they do really important work, and it's the kind of work that we think more people should hear about it.
We had an initial meeting with Claudia where we brainstormed what our panel was going to look like, and that taking up space were our really key areas that we wanted to talk about. And taking up space is very literally, the idea we're trying to get across is to get women to take up more space physically with their bodies, with their voices, with their visibility, with their representation, everything. It's just, this is what women need, is to stop apologizing for the space they take up and to metaphorically and very, very literally take up more space. I know that Manny, so the youngest panel participant, she got a lot of support from them, and they talked to her about how you approach it, what you'd need to prepare yourself for. They let her take over their Instagram for a day, so that gave her amazing exposure. And she is in performing arts as well, so it gave her an amazing platform to kind of make connections and networks. So for her, I think it was just an invaluable both experience, exposure, and connection.
We don't expect people to be at a polished level when they come to us. That is how we differ to other arts organisations, because we do have that process of mentoring, and we have that process of skill building and capacity building and confidence building as well.
So basically with this mentoring project that I'm doing now with the centre, which is for cold writers, when Caroline initially started the project and I heard about it, I didn't even think to myself that I could or should apply for it, because I think living as a biracial person or a person of colour in this country often means that you can be eroded in certain ways quite easily. And so, as crazy as this sounds, I didn't really consider myself to be a cold writer, or I guess to be brown enough almost. And it was only when Caroline said to me, "You should apply for this mentoring project," that I realised that I could. So I was paired with Rashida Murphy, and it's been a really amazing experience too.
When we work with underrepresented communities, whether you have a disability or you're a migrant, we always say, we want you to tell a story that you want to share. We want you to tell a story that might not be the normal story for you to tell, because I think it's important for people to kind of look at someone else and not have these expectations, kind of learning to break down stereotypes. So for us, it's always looking at getting that story that makes people sit back and think about aspects of someone else's lives or culture that they might not be aware of. And I think that for the storyteller is very empowering. It also gives them agency.
So our allegiance is always to the storyteller rather than the story. It's about human connection. It's about providing people a platform to speak about who they are and who they want to be and how they want to be defined as well. So one that we think about often was a project funded by Community Arts Network called Bright Lights No City. So that project engaged young people who grew up in regional WA who identify as LGBTQIA+. And they were different, varying in age, but probably all under 30, so between 20 to 30 years old.
We initially started off with 18 storytellers who were split into two groups, people who opted to do their work as writers and people who wanted to do oral storytelling. By the end of the project, we had 9 storytellers in total. We found that it was very difficult for some people to tell their stories, which of course it was.
When you're working with people and you're asking them to be really vulnerable and to share things that sometimes people haven't shared with anyone else, and then they work towards sharing it with a room full of 50 people, there will be challenges along the way.
But the 9 who stayed on, I ended up being one of them. I remember I initially thought that I was just the project manager, and at some point during the project, Caroline said to me, "Absurd, of course you have to tell your story as well." And that was a really intense but beautiful thing, because up until that point I'd always had this idea that I wanted to be a writer, but I suppose kind of secretly and not in a way that I ever thought would materialize. And the story that I produced, I can't even tell you how good it made me feel to put that on paper and to share it with people. For me personally, coming to the centre has really changed me as a person. And I don't really know where I'd be or who I would be if I hadn't had the sort of support and encouragement that they're providing for people who come from marginalised backgrounds.
There are challenges, despite the fact we might be diverse in terms of culture and disabilities. And I also think we're still appealing to a very middle class group of people who can have that access. For us, it's also overcoming some of those barriers we have imposed on ourselves through our privilege. But partnering with other organizations, I think, does help to reach a different target group. I also think by having people from all sorts of different backgrounds on your staff and on your board sends a very strong signal to your target audience. And I have had lots of organizations come to us and talk to us about diversity, and before they come I always look on their board, because I say to them, just look at your board. There are actually lots of capable people out there. I see the same people on multiple boards, and the excuse I get is that people don't have the skills. I think part of an organization is to mentor people. So, it's not hard to have a board where you have maybe 2 people who've never sat on a board before and the rest are well-experienced board. I guess one of the things I'd like to say is that, we've had lots of discussion around this, and we've had lots of arts funding organizations also saying they're committed to this. And my one, I guess, maybe challenge, but also appeal to my fellow arts organizations is it's not that difficult, that they should just get on and do it rather than just talking about it.